I'm Rebecca Martinez, and 4 years ago, my mother screamed those exact words at me through tears of rage and humiliation. Standing in the driveway of my brand new $850,000 dream home that I'd just bought with cold, hard cash, she pointed her perfectly manicured finger at me and declared I was no longer her daughter. Today, as I sip my morning coffee on the marble balcony of that same house, overlooking the neighborhood my family always pretended to belong to but never could afford, I'm worth over $3 million in real estate alone. My mother, on the other hand, just lost her third rental home this year and had to move into a studio apartment across town. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The journey from that devastating moment in my driveway to watching my family's financial house of cards completely collapse wasn't something I planned for revenge. But sometimes life has a way of serving justice on a silver platter, and all you have to do is sit back and watch the show unfold. What started as my mother's jealousy over my success became the very thing that exposed just how fake their entire lifestyle really was. Growing up in Riverside, California, our family lived in what appeared to be the perfect suburban dream. Our house sat in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the city, with its sprawling front lawn, 3-car garage, and the kind of address that made people nod approvingly when you mentioned it at dinner parties. The interior was magazine-worthy, with designer furniture, expensive artwork on the walls, and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a luxury home tour. My mother, Linda Martinez, made sure every detail screamed success and sophistication. Linda had been the homecoming queen at her high school and runner-up Miss Riverside in her early 20s. Even at 45, she maintained that beauty queen posture and the expectation that life should bend to her will the way judges once did when she walked across a stage in a sparkling gown. She drove a gleaming white BMW, carried purses that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and never left the house without looking like she was headed to a photo shoot. Her social calendar was packed with charity luncheons, country club events, and dinner parties, where the guest list read like a who's who of Riverside's elite. My father, Robert Martinez, had inherited a construction company from his father, and while the business had been successful in previous decades, the changing economy and increased competition had gradually eroded its profitability. Bob was a gentleman who preferred to avoid confrontation at all costs, which meant he rarely challenged Linda's spending habits or questioned her increasingly elaborate lifestyle demands. He worked long hours trying to keep the business afloat, bidding on smaller projects and struggling to compete with larger firms that had more resources and newer equipment. The truth that nobody outside our immediate family knew was that we were living a complete financial lie. The beautiful house was rented, not owned. The designer furniture was leased. Linda's BMW was on a lease that stretched their budget to the breaking point every month. The expensive jewelry, the country club membership, the charity donations that earned them recognition in the local paper, all of it was funded by a growing mountain of credit card debt that kept expanding like a financial tumor. Linda had become masterful at juggling payments, transferring balances between cards, and using cash advances to make minimum payments on other accounts. She treated credit like free money, always certain that Bob's business would turn around next month, or that some big contract would come through and solve all their problems. In her mind, maintaining their social status was an investment in their future. If they looked successful, success would naturally follow. My older brother David understood this family dynamic instinctively and played his role perfectly. He studied business in college, landed a job with a respected financial services company, and married Ashley, a sweet woman whose father owned several car dealerships across Southern California. David and Ashley rented an expensive apartment in a trendy part of town, drove matching luxury cars with payments that consumed most of David's salary, and attended the same social events as our parents. They looked prosperous and successful, which was exactly what Linda expected from her children. I, on the other hand, was the family anomaly from an early age. While Linda dragged me to pageants and insisted I participate in activities that would enhance my social standing, I was quietly fascinated by something entirely different: real estate. It started when I was 12 years old and began paying attention to the houses in our neighborhood. I noticed which ones sold quickly and which ones sat on the market for months. I started walking through open houses on weekends, studying the layouts, listening to the real estate agents discuss pricing strategies and market conditions. By high school, I was reading real estate investment books I checked out from the library, studying property values in different neighborhoods, and learning about concepts like cash flow, appreciation, and return on investment. While my classmates were focused on social media and weekend parties, I was analyzing rental rates and calculating potential profits from property improvements. Linda found my interest both boring and embarrassing, often telling her friends that I was going through a phase and would eventually develop more appropriate interests for a young lady. The one person who recognized and encouraged my unconventional passion was my Aunt Carmen, my father's younger sister. Carmen owned a small but successful Mexican restaurant called Casa Carmen that she had built from nothing over 15 years. She had started as a waitress at another restaurant, saved every penny she could, and eventually scraped together enough money to lease a tiny space in a strip mall. Through hard work, authentic food, and smart financial management, she had grown the business into a local institution that consistently turned a profit. Carmen was everything my mother was not: practical, straightforward, and genuinely successful, rather than performing success for an audience. She had bought her own modest home with cash, drove a reliable Honda that she maintained meticulously, and had built a substantial savings account through disciplined spending and smart investments. When I started asking her questions about real estate and business ownership, she didn't dismiss my curiosity like my mother did. Instead, she began teaching me about financial responsibility, the difference between assets and liabilities, and the importance of building wealth rather than just displaying it. During my junior year of high school, Carmen took me to visit a duplex she was considering purchasing as a rental property. Walking through the property with her and the real estate agent, I felt something click into place. The agent explained how Carmen could Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Live in one unit while renting out the other, essentially having tenants pay most of her mortgage while she built equity in the property. The concept was elegant in its simplicity: use other people's money to buy assets that would appreciate over time while generating monthly income. That night, I went home and started researching everything I could find about house hacking, rental properties, and real estate investing. I discovered books by authors who had built massive wealth through property investments, online forums where investors shared strategies and success stories, and podcasts featuring interviews with people who had replaced their traditional jobs with income from rental properties. This wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a potential career path that excited me more than anything I had ever studied in school. Linda's reaction to my growing real estate obsession was predictably negative. She couldn't understand why her daughter would want to get involved in something as unglamorous as property management and tenant relations. In her worldview, successful people paid other people to handle such mundane concerns. Real estate was something you bought to live in, not something you studied or used to generate income. She wanted me to focus on finding a wealthy husband or pursuing a career that would enhance our family's social standing, like becoming a doctor or lawyer. The tension between my interests and my mother's expectations continued to build throughout high school. While my grades were excellent and I was accepted to several prestigious universities, I chose San Diego State University specifically because they had a strong real estate program, and the cost of attendance would allow me to graduate with minimal student loan debt. Linda was mortified that I had turned down offers from more prestigious schools to attend what she considered a party school for a degree in what she called playing with houses. My freshman year at San Diego State was liberating in ways I hadn't anticipated. Away from Linda's constant criticism and social pressure, I threw myself into my studies with genuine enthusiasm. My professors in the real estate program were practicing professionals who shared real-world insights about market analysis, property valuation, and investment strategies. I joined the real estate club, attended guest lectures by successful investors, and spent my free time visiting open houses in different San Diego neighborhoods to understand local market conditions. More importantly, I started taking action on what I was learning. During my sophomore year, I found a small condo near campus that was being sold by an elderly owner who needed to move quickly to an assisted living facility. The property was priced below market value because it needed cosmetic updates, but the location was excellent, and the bones of the building were solid. Using money I had saved from high school jobs and a small inheritance from my grandmother, I managed to put together enough for a down payment and closing costs. The renovation process was my real education in real estate investing. I learned to coordinate with contractors, research the most cost-effective improvements, and manage timelines and budgets. I painted walls myself, installed new fixtures, and spent weekends at Home Depot learning about everything from plumbing to electrical work. After 3 months of improvements, I had transformed a dated, dingy condo into a bright, modern space that I could rent to graduate students for significantly more than my mortgage payment. When I called home to share my excitement about closing on my first property, Linda's response was everything I should have expected, but somehow still managed to hurt. She made jokes about me becoming a slumlord and wondered aloud why I was wasting my college years on such an unseemly pursuit. She seemed genuinely confused about why I would want to be responsible for other people's living situations and couldn't understand how managing rental properties could be considered a legitimate career path. David's reaction was more subtle but equally dismissive. He congratulated me politely but made comments about how small-time real estate investing was compared to the sophisticated financial instruments he worked with in his job. He suggested that once I graduated and got serious about my career, I would probably want to sell the condo and focus on building wealth through more traditional means like stock portfolios and retirement accounts. But Aunt Carmen understood exactly what I had accomplished. When she visited San Diego and saw the property I had renovated, her pride was obvious and genuine. She walked through every room, asked detailed questions about the improvements I had made, and listened carefully as I explained my financing strategy and rental projections. As we sat in my small but efficiently designed living space, she looked at me with the kind of respect I had never seen in my mother's eyes. Carmen told me something that evening that I still remember word for word. Rebecca, what you've done here is exactly what your grandfather did when he started the construction company. You saw an opportunity, you took a calculated risk, and you're building something with your own hands and your own brain. Don't let anyone make you feel small for understanding how money really works. Her validation meant more to me than any grade 1 had ever received or any compliment about my appearance. By my senior year, the cash flow from my first rental property had allowed me to save aggressively for a second investment. I found a small house about 15 minutes from campus that had been on the market for several months because it needed significant repairs that scared away most buyers. The previous owners had started a renovation project but run out of money halfway through, leaving the property in a state that looked worse than it actually was. I was able to negotiate a price that was nearly 30% below the neighborhood average because most buyers couldn't see past the surface problems to the potential underneath. This renovation was more complex than my first project, requiring me to work with contractors for major electrical and plumbing updates while handling smaller improvements myself. I spent every weekend and most evenings at the property, learning skills I never could have imagined needing when I started college. But with each completed room, I could see the transformation taking place and calculate the increased value I was creating through sweat equity and smart planning. When I graduated from San Diego State, I owned 2 rental properties that were generating enough monthly income to cover my basic living expenses. I had learned more about business, finance, and problem solving in 4 years of real estate investing than most people learn in entire careers. I had also developed a confidence in my own judgment and abilities that no amount of classroom instruction could have provided. Linda attended my graduation ceremony, but her pride seemed forced and conditional. She spent most of the weekend complaining about the heat, the crowds, and the quality of restaurants in San Diego. When I showed her my second property, which I had just finished renovating, she made comments about the neighborhood being rough around the edges and wondered why I couldn't invest in nicer areas if I was going to insist on pursuing real estate. She seemed incapable of recognizing the financial achievement I had accomplished or understanding that I had built a foundation for long-term wealth creation. The job market for recent college graduates was challenging, but my real estate experience had given me practical business skills that employers valued. I accepted a position with a marketing agency in Phoenix, Arizona, that worked primarily with real estate developers and property management companies. The job would allow me to learn more about the industry from a different perspective, while providing a stable income that I could use to continue expanding my property portfolio. Moving to Phoenix meant leaving my rental properties in San Diego, but I had built relationships with reliable property management companies that could handle day-to-day operations while I focused on my new career and scouted for investment opportunities in Arizona. The Phoenix market was experiencing significant growth, with new residents moving to the area attracted by lower living costs and abundant job opportunities. Housing demand was increasing faster than supply, creating ideal conditions for real estate investors who could identify undervalued properties in emerging neighborhoods. My first year in Phoenix was intensely focused on learning the local market and building my professional network. I attended every real estate investor meetup, joined online forums dedicated to Arizona real estate, and spent weekends driving through different neighborhoods to understand pricing trends and development patterns. My job at the marketing agency provided insider knowledge about which areas developers were targeting for future projects, giving me insights that helped identify properties with strong appreciation potential. The rental income from my San Diego properties, combined with my salary in Phoenix, allowed me to save aggressively for my next investment. I was living in a modest apartment, driving a reliable used car, and avoiding the lifestyle inflation that consumed most of my colleagues' increased earnings. While they were financing expensive cars and upgrading to luxury apartments, I was accumulating capital for property purchases that would generate income for decades. My family's reaction to my move to Phoenix was mixed. Linda was pleased that I had a respectable marketing job, but continued to view my real estate activities as a questionable hobby that distracted from finding a suitable husband and settling down. David was supportive in principle, but clearly didn't understand the scope of what I was building. He would ask superficial questions about my properties, but seemed more interested in talking about his own career advancement and the expensive lifestyle he and Ashley were maintaining. Aunt Carmen was my strongest supporter during this period, calling regularly to check on my progress and offering advice based on her own business experience. She had been watching the financial stress that Linda's spending was creating for my father, and she often expressed concern about their long-term financial security. Carmen understood better than anyone in my family that building real wealth required discipline, patience, and the ability to delay gratification for long-term gain. During my second year in Phoenix, I began to understand the complex web of relationships that had shaped my family's dysfunction for decades. The marketing agency where I worked represented several high-end residential developments, and through my professional connections, I started to see patterns in how wealthy families actually managed their money, versus how families like mine performed wealth for social acceptance. My mother, Linda, had grown up as the youngest daughter of a working-class family in Riverside. Her father had been a mechanic, and her mother had worked part-time at a department store to help make ends meet. Linda's natural beauty and charismatic personality had opened doors for her that education and family connections couldn't provide. She had learned early that her appearance and charm could get her access to social circles that would otherwise remain closed to someone from her background. When Linda won the Miss Riverside competition at age 21, she had briefly entertained dreams of competing at higher levels, possibly even pursuing modeling or acting opportunities in Los Angeles. But those ambitions faded when she met my father at a charity fundraiser, where she was making an appearance as the reigning queen. Bob Martinez was 25, recently graduated from college, and in line to inherit a construction business that was thriving during the building boom of the early 1990s. Bob represented everything Linda thought she wanted: financial security, social respectability, and entry into Riverside's established business community. The Martinez family had been successful contractors for 2 generations, and Bob's father owned a substantial property throughout the city. When Linda married Bob, she believed she was securing her place in the upper echelons of local society permanently. What Linda hadn't anticipated was that Bob's gentle, conflict-avoidant personality would make him incapable of managing either the business challenges that lay ahead or her increasingly expensive lifestyle demands. As the construction industry became more competitive and profit margins tightened, Bob found himself overwhelmed by the financial pressures while simultaneously trying to maintain the standard of living that Linda considered essential to their social standing. The pattern that emerged over the years was both predictable and destructive. Linda would make expensive purchases or commit to costly social obligations without consulting Bob about their financial implications. When Bob would attempt to raise concerns about their mounting debt, Linda would become defensive and emotional, accusing him of not supporting her efforts to maintain their family's reputation. Bob, who hated confrontation and wanted to preserve peace in his marriage, would typically back down and find ways to accommodate Linda's spending through creative financing or business decisions that prioritized short-term cash flow over long-term stability. My brother David had learned to navigate this dynamic by becoming Linda's primary ally and emotional support system. From childhood, he had understood that earning Linda's approval required embracing her values and defending her choices, even when those choices were obviously problematic. David genuinely loved our mother, but his loyalty had been purchased through years of preferential treatment and positive reinforcement for conforming to her expectations. David's role as the golden child wasn't accidental or arbitrary. Linda had consciously cultivated his allegiance by involving him in adult conversations about family finances and social obligations from a young age. She had made him feel special and trusted by sharing her concerns about Bob's business struggles and her frustrations with maintaining their lifestyle. David had absorbed the message that protecting Linda's happiness was his responsibility as the eldest child and the family member, with the best understanding of their social and financial challenges. This dynamic had created a peculiar form of emotional intimacy between Linda and David that excluded both Bob and me. They would have long phone conversations about family strategy, social commitments, and financial planning that felt more like business partnerships than typical mother-son relationships. David's wife, Ashley, had gradually learned to accept that her husband's primary emotional loyalty belonged to his mother, and that major decisions about their own lifestyle and spending would always be filtered through Linda's opinions and expectations. The contrast between David's relationship with Linda and my own had been apparent since childhood, but it became particularly stark during my college years when I began pursuing real estate investing, where David's business interests earned him respect and inclusion in family financial discussions. My property investments were treated as hobbies or phase that I would eventually outgrow. Linda seemed genuinely confused by my desire to generate income through rental properties, viewing it as unnecessarily complicated and somehow beneath our family's social status. The deeper issue was that my success in real estate threatened the carefully constructed narrative that Linda had built about our family's financial situation. As long as everyone in the family was struggling to maintain an expensive lifestyle through debt and creative financing, Linda's own financial irresponsibility seemed reasonable and necessary. But my approach of building actual wealth through disciplined investing and delayed gratification highlighted the flaws in the strategy that had guided our family's financial decisions for years. Linda's criticism of my real estate activities intensified as my portfolio grew and my understanding of financial principles deepened. She would make comments about how unglamorous property management was, suggesting that successful people hired others to handle such mundane responsibilities. She questioned why I would want to deal with tenants and maintenance issues when I could be focusing on finding a successful husband who could provide financial security without requiring me to work at all. The underlying message in Linda's criticism was that my independence and financial success were somehow threatening to the family's established order. In her worldview, children were supposed to remain financially dependent on their parents until they married and transferred that dependence to their spouses. My ability to generate substantial income through real estate investing disrupted that traditional progression and implied criticism of the financial strategies that had guided her own life choices. Bob's reaction to my real estate success was more complex and subtle than Linda's open disapproval. Part of him was genuinely proud of my accomplishments and impressed by my practical business skills. He understood construction and property development from his own professional experience, and he could see that I was making smart decisions about property selection, renovation strategies, and market timing. But Bob was also intimidated by my success and worried about how it would affect his relationship with Linda. Several times during my Phoenix years, Bob would call me privately to ask questions about real estate investing or to seek advice about property-related decisions for his construction business. These conversations revealed that he had a much deeper understanding of my achievements than he was comfortable expressing in front of Linda. He was genuinely curious about my investment strategies and seemed to wish he had pursued similar approaches earlier in his own career. But Bob's private support never translated into public advocacy when Linda would criticize my career choices or dismiss my financial accomplishments. He had learned over years of marriage that defending decisions Linda disapproved of would result in weeks of emotional turmoil and relationship tension that he found unbearable. His strategy for maintaining peace was to avoid taking sides in conflicts between Linda and me, which effectively meant allowing Linda's perspective to dominate family discussions about my future. The most painful aspect of this family dynamic was watching Bob's own financial stress increase while he remained unable to challenge Linda's spending patterns or implement the kind of disciplined financial management that could have solved many of their problems. His construction business was generating enough revenue to support a comfortable middle-class lifestyle, but Linda's expenses consistently exceeded their income by substantial margins. Bob was constantly juggling credit card payments, home equity loans, and business financing to maintain cash flow, while projecting an image of prosperity that was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. Aunt Carmen provided the clearest perspective on our family's financial dysfunction, because she had achieved genuine financial success through the principles that Linda rejected: living below your means, building assets rather than accumulating liabilities, and prioritizing long-term wealth creation over short-term status signaling. Carmen had watched Linda's spending patterns with growing concern for years, but she had learned that offering unsolicited financial advice would only create family conflict without changing anyone's behavior. Carmen's restaurant had thrived because she had applied conservative financial management principles consistently over many years. She had resisted the temptation to expand too quickly, had maintained substantial cash reserves for unexpected challenges, and had built relationships with suppliers and employees based on reliability rather than flashy gestures. Her success was quiet and sustainable rather than dramatic and attention-grabbing, which made it less visible than Linda's performance of wealth but far more secure. The contrast between Carmen's authentic financial success and our family's debt-financed lifestyle became increasingly apparent during family gatherings and social events. Carmen would arrive in her practical Honda, wearing clothes that were well-made, but not obviously expensive, and contribute meaningfully to conversations about business and investment strategies. Linda would arrive in her leased BMW, wearing designer outfits that had been purchased with credit cards, and steer conversations towards social gossip and lifestyle topics that didn't require discussing actual financial substance. Carmen had tried various approaches over the years to encourage Linda to adopt more sustainable financial habits, but she had learned that direct confrontation only resulted in Linda becoming defensive and accusatory. Instead, Carmen focused on supporting family members who were interested in learning practical financial skills, which primarily meant mentoring me and occasionally offering subtle guidance to Bob when he asked for her perspective on business decisions. The relationship between Carmen and Linda was cordial but strained, representing two fundamentally different philosophies about money, success, and social responsibility. Carmen believed that financial security came from disciplined spending, hard work, and building assets that generated sustainable income over time. Linda believed that financial security came from maintaining social connections, projecting an image of success that would attract opportunities, and trusting that financial problems would resolve themselves through luck or other people's assistance. These competing worldviews created an undercurrent of tension at family events that everyone recognized but rarely discussed openly. Carmen's presence served as a subtle reminder that alternative approaches to financial management were possible and potentially more effective than the strategies our immediate family had chosen. Linda's reaction to this implied criticism was to become more defensive about her lifestyle choices and more critical of family members who seemed to be questioning her judgment. My own relationship with Linda had been complicated by these dynamics since childhood, but the tension reached new levels as my real estate portfolio expanded and my financial independence became increasingly obvious. Every property I purchased, every rental income check I deposited, and every conversation I had about investment strategies served as evidence that Linda's approach to money management was not the only viable option for achieving financial security. The specific incident that crystallized these long-building tensions occurred during a family dinner at an expensive restaurant that Linda had chosen to celebrate David's latest promotion at his financial services company. Linda had made reservations at one of Riverside's most prestigious establishments, and she had insisted that everyone dress appropriately for the upscale environment. The evening was intended to showcase our family's success and social status to other diners who would recognize the significance of our presence at such an exclusive venue. During dinner, the conversation naturally turned to David's career advancement and his increased salary. which Linda praised enthusiastically while making comments about how proud she was to have raised such a successful son. David basked in the attention and described his expanded responsibilities and the additional opportunities his promotion would create for future advancement. Ashley contributed details about their plans to move to a larger apartment in an even more prestigious area of the city. When Linda asked about my own career progress, I mentioned that I had recently closed on my 4th rental property in Phoenix and was considering expanding into the Dallas market, where I had identified several undervalued neighborhoods with strong growth potential. I explained that my portfolio was now generating enough monthly income to cover all my living expenses, giving me the freedom to take calculated risks with property investments that could significantly accelerate my wealth-building timeline. Linda's response revealed the depth of her discomfort with my unconventional path to financial success. She made a comment about how exhausting it must be to manage multiple properties and deal with tenant issues, suggesting that my approach to wealth building was unnecessarily complicated and stressful. She wondered aloud why I wouldn't prefer to focus on finding a successful husband who could provide financial security without requiring me to work so hard at such an unglamorous business. The implication in Linda's comments was that my real estate investing represented a failure to achieve the kind of effortless prosperity that she considered appropriate for someone from our family background. In her worldview, successful women married successful men and enjoyed financial security as a byproduct of those relationships, not as the result of their own business activities. My insistence on building independent wealth through property investments seemed to her like an unnecessarily difficult path that reflected poorly on our family's social status. David's reaction to Linda's criticism was particularly painful because it revealed how completely he had absorbed her perspective on financial success and social acceptability. Rather than defending my accomplishments or acknowledging the impressive nature of what I had achieved, David made comments that subtly reinforced Linda's position. He suggested that real estate investing was fine for now, but wondered whether I had considered the long-term implications of tying up so much capital in illiquid assets rather than building a more diversified investment portfolio. The subtext of David's comments was that my real estate focus demonstrated a lack of sophisticated financial knowledge and that I would eventually need to transition to more traditional wealth-building strategies if I wanted to achieve serious financial success. His tone was condescending in a way that made it clear he viewed my property investments as a stepping stone to more legitimate forms of wealth creation rather than as a sustainable long-term strategy. Bob's silence during this conversation was as revealing as Linda's and David's active criticism. He understood real estate and construction well enough to recognize that I was making smart decisions and achieving impressive results, but he was unwilling to challenge Linda's narrative about appropriate career paths for women in our family. His failure to defend my accomplishments or acknowledge my financial success felt like a betrayal that was particularly painful, because I knew he understood the value of what I was building. The evening ended with Linda making pointed comments about how important it was for our family to maintain appropriate social standards and to make choices that reflected well on our reputation in the community. She suggested that my focus on real estate investing was creating the wrong impression about our family's values and priorities, implying that I was somehow damaging our collective social standing by pursuing wealth through methods she considered beneath our status. That night, I lay awake in my hotel room thinking about the fundamental disconnect between my family's values and my own approach to life and financial success. Linda's criticism wasn't really about real estate investing specifically. It was about my refusal to accept her definition of success and appropriate behavior for women in our family. My financial independence threatened her authority and undermined the narrative she had constructed about how prosperity should be achieved and maintained. The pattern that had emerged over years of family interactions was becoming increasingly clear and unsustainable. Linda would continue to criticize my choices as long as they represented alternatives to her preferred lifestyle and financial strategies. David would continue to support Linda's perspective, because doing so reinforced his position as the favored child and validated his own life choices. Bob would continue to avoid taking sides, because confronting Linda's unreasonable expectations would require him to acknowledge his own failures to establish appropriate financial boundaries in their marriage. My success in real estate was forcing everyone in my family to confront uncomfortable truths about their own financial decisions and life strategies. Rather than celebrating my achievements or learning from my approaches to wealth building, they were becoming increasingly defensive and critical, because my independence highlighted the flaws in their own approaches to money management and social status. The months following that disastrous family dinner marked a turning point in my relationship with everyone back home, but it also coincided with the most aggressive period of wealth building in my real estate career. I had reached a psychological breaking point where I stopped seeking validation from my family and started focusing entirely on accelerating my financial independence. If Linda wanted to dismiss my achievements and David wanted to condescend to my investment strategies, I would simply build wealth so substantial that their opinions would become irrelevant. My fourth property in Phoenix had been a duplex in an emerging neighborhood that was showing early signs of gentrification. Young professionals were beginning to move into the area, attracted by affordable housing prices and proximity to downtown employment centers. I had purchased the duplex for significantly below market value because the previous owner had inherited it from a relative and wanted to sell quickly without dealing with the complications of renovation or tenant management. The property required substantial work to maximize its rental potential, but I had developed relationships with reliable contractors and had learned to manage renovation projects efficiently. Over the course of 3 months, I oversaw complete updates to both units, installing modern appliances, refinishing hardwood floors, and updating bathrooms and kitchens to appeal to the demographic of renters who were moving into the neighborhood. The financial results exceeded my projections significantly. Both units rented within days of completion to young professionals who were willing to pay premium rates for updated housing in a convenient location. The monthly rental income was nearly double my mortgage payment, creating substantial positive cash flow that I immediately began reinvesting in my next property purchase. More importantly, the rapid appreciation in property values in that neighborhood validated my market analysis and gave me confidence to pursue larger and more ambitious investments. Within 6 months of completing the renovation, comparable properties in the area were selling for prices that would have generated substantial equity gains if I had chosen to sell rather than hold for rental income. This success enabled me to secure financing for my fifth property, a small single-family home in a different Phoenix neighborhood that was experiencing similar early-stage gentrification. The pattern was becoming clear. Identify areas where young professionals and families were beginning to relocate, purchase undervalued properties that needed cosmetic improvements, execute efficient renovations that appealed to the target demographic, and rent to quality tenants who would pay market rates for updated housing. The systematic nature of this approach appealed to my analytical personality while generating financial results that were exceeding my most optimistic projections. Each property purchase and successful renovation was teaching me valuable lessons about market timing, contractor management, and tenant selection that would make future investments more profitable and less risky. But the emotional cost of my family's lack of support was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Every conversation with Linda or David seemed to include subtle criticism of my career choices or suggestions that I should be focusing on more traditional paths to financial security. The disconnect between my objective success and their dismissive attitude was creating a sense of isolation that affected my relationships with friends and colleagues in Phoenix. Aunt Carmen remained my primary source of encouragement and practical advice during this period. She would call regularly to check on my progress and offer insights based on her own experience building a successful business. Carmen understood the psychological challenges of pursuing unconventional paths to success, while facing criticism from family members who didn't understand or appreciate the value of independent wealth creation. During one of our longer conversations, Carmen shared details about her own struggles with Linda's disapproval when she had first opened the restaurant. Linda had been embarrassed by Carmen's decision to work in food service, viewing it as beneath the social status that the Martinez family should maintain. Carmen had persisted despite the criticism because she understood that building genuine wealth required focusing on substance rather than appearances. Carmen's perspective on our family's financial situation was increasingly pessimistic. She had observed Linda's spending patterns closely over the years and had watched Bob's business struggles with growing concern. The construction industry in Riverside was facing increased competition from larger firms, and Bob's company was losing contracts to competitors who could offer lower prices by operating with more efficient equipment and labor management. The combination of declining business income and Linda's unchanging expense levels was creating an unsustainable financial trajectory that Carmen believed would eventually result in serious consequences. She'd attempted several times to raise these concerns with Bob, but he seemed incapable of implementing the changes that would be necessary to address their fundamental financial problems. Carmen's insights into my family's deteriorating financial situation added urgency to my own wealth-building efforts. I began to realize that my real estate success might eventually need to serve as a financial safety net for family members who were making increasingly poor decisions about money management. This possibility motivated me to accelerate my investment timeline and focus on building the largest possible portfolio in the shortest reasonable time frame. My sixth property purchase represented a significant escalation in both scale and risk. I had identified a small apartment building with 4 units that was being sold by an out-of-state owner who was tired of managing long-distance rental properties. The building was structurally sound but had been poorly maintained, with outdated interiors and landscaping that made it less attractive to quality tenants. The purchase required me to stretch my financing capacity and commit to a renovation budget that would consume most of my cash reserves. But the potential returns were proportionally higher, with 4 rental units that could generate substantial monthly income once the improvements were completed. The location was excellent, in an established neighborhood with good schools and convenient access to major employment centers. Managing the renovation of 4 units simultaneously was the most complex project I had undertaken, requiring careful coordination of multiple contractors and precise scheduling to minimize vacancy periods. I spent every weekend at the property, overseeing work progress and handling details that couldn't be delegated to contractors. The physical and emotional demands were exhausting, but I was motivated by the knowledge that successful completion would represent a major milestone in my wealth-building journey. The project took nearly 5 months to complete, but the results exceeded my expectations in every meaningful metric. All 4 units rented quickly to professional tenants who signed long-term leases at rates that generated substantial positive cash flow. The building's improved appearance and functionality had also increased its overall value significantly, creating equity gains that could support future property purchases. More importantly, the monthly rental income from 6 properties was now sufficient to cover all my living expenses with substantial surplus for reinvestment. I had achieved a level of financial independence that most people never reach, and I was still only 25 years old. The psychological impact of this achievement was profound, creating a sense of security and confidence that affected every aspect of my life. My success was attracting attention from other real estate investors in Phoenix, and I was invited to speak at investor meetups about my strategies for identifying undervalued properties and managing renovation projects efficiently. These presentations led to networking opportunities with more experienced investors who were pursuing larger-scale projects and different investment strategies. One particularly valuable connection was Marcus Thompson, a veteran investor who had built a portfolio of over 50 rental properties throughout Arizona and Texas. Marcus had started investing in real estate 20 years earlier and had developed sophisticated systems for property acquisition, renovation management, and tenant relations. He was impressed by the rapid growth of my portfolio and the quality of my renovation work. Marcus became an informal mentor, sharing insights about scaling real estate investments and avoiding common mistakes that could derail promising investment careers. He introduced me to wholesalers who could identify off-market properties, contractors who specialized in investment property renovations, and property managers who could handle day-to-day operations for investors who owned multiple properties. More significantly, Marcus helped me understand the importance of geographic diversification and market timing in building a sustainable real estate portfolio. He encouraged me to consider expanding into markets outside Arizona, particularly Texas cities that were experiencing rapid population growth and job creation. His analysis of demographic trends and economic indicators provided a framework for making strategic decisions about where to invest next. The relationship with Marcus also provided perspective on the long-term potential of real estate investing as a wealth-building strategy. He shared details about his own financial achievements, including the passive income generated by his property portfolio and the equity gains from appreciation over time. His success demonstrated that the path I had chosen could potentially lead to genuine financial independence and generational wealth. But Marcus also warned me about the importance of maintaining relationships with family members who might not understand or appreciate real estate investing. He had experienced similar criticism from relatives who viewed property management as inappropriate work for educated professionals, and he had learned that success could sometimes create unexpected social and family tensions. His advice was to continue building wealth aggressively while maintaining emotional boundaries with family members who were unsupportive or critical. He suggested that my financial success would eventually speak for itself, but that trying to convince skeptical family members through argument or explanation was usually counterproductive and emotionally draining. This guidance proved particularly relevant as my relationship with Linda continued to deteriorate over the following months. She had learned about my growing property portfolio through conversations with Bob and David, and her reaction was a mixture of confusion and disapproval that was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate during family communications. Linda seemed genuinely unable to understand why I would choose to build wealth through methods that required active management and ongoing responsibility for other people's housing situations. In her worldview, successful people accumulated wealth through passive investments or marriage relationships that didn't require hands-on involvement in business operations. My insistence on personally overseeing renovations and tenant relations struck her as unnecessarily complicated and somehow beneath our family's social status. The tension reached a new level during a phone conversation where Linda suggested that my real estate activities were creating the wrong impression about our family's values and priorities. She was concerned that my involvement in property management might lead people to think that our family needed income from rental properties, which would undermine the image of prosperity that she had worked for years to maintain. The underlying message was that my financial success was somehow embarrassing to Linda, because it highlighted the difference between earned wealth and the debt-financed lifestyle that she preferred to maintain. My ability to generate substantial income through real estate investing implied criticism of her own financial strategies and threatened the narrative she had constructed about appropriate ways to achieve and display prosperity. This conversation marked the beginning of a pattern where Linda would make increasingly pointed comments about my career choices during family interactions. She would suggest that I should consider transitioning to more traditional investment approaches, or focusing on finding a successful husband who could provide financial security without requiring me to work in what she considered an inappropriate field. David's attitude toward my real estate success was evolving in a different but equally problematic direction. Rather than dismissing my achievements entirely, he had begun to offer unsolicited advice about how I should modify my investment strategies to align with more conventional approaches to wealth building. His suggestions typically involved reducing my focus on direct property ownership in favor of real estate investment trusts or other securities-based investments that would require less active management. The condescending tone of David's advice revealed his assumption that my real estate focus represented a lack of sophisticated financial knowledge rather than a deliberate strategy based on careful market analysis and risk assessment. He seemed unable to acknowledge that my approach was generating superior returns compared to the traditional investment approaches he advocated. Bob's reaction to my success remained the most complex and emotionally difficult to navigate. In private conversations, he would express genuine pride in my achievements and ask detailed questions about my investment strategies and renovation projects. He understood construction and property development well enough to recognize the quality of my work and the intelligence of my market positioning. But Bob's private support never translated into public advocacy when Linda or David would criticize my career choices. His refusal to defend my accomplishments during family discussions felt like a betrayal that was particularly painful, because I knew he understood the value of what I was building. His conflict avoidance strategy was sacrificing our relationship to maintain peace with Linda, a trade-off that was becoming increasingly hurtful and unsustainable. The most significant challenge during this period was managing the emotional impact of family criticism, while maintaining the focus and confidence necessary to continue building wealth aggressively. Every successful property purchase and renovation was accompanied by family conversations that minimized my achievements or suggested that I should be pursuing different approaches to financial success. The psychological strain was affecting my relationships with friends and colleagues in Phoenix, who couldn't understand why my family wasn't celebrating my obvious financial achievements. Explaining the complex dynamics of my family's attitudes toward money and success was exhausting, and often made me question whether I was somehow wrong to prioritize wealth building over family harmony. Aunt Carmen's continued support was crucial during these months of increasing family tension. She provided perspective on Linda's behavior that helped me understand that my mother's criticism was rooted in her own financial insecurities rather than legitimate concerns about my career choices. Carmen's validation of my investment strategies and business skills helped counterbalance the negativity I was receiving from my immediate family. Carmen also shared insights about the long-term trajectory of my parents' financial situation that added urgency to my wealth-building efforts. Bob's construction business was facing increasing pressure from larger competitors, and Linda's spending patterns showed no signs of moderating despite their deteriorating financial circumstances. Carmen believed that a serious financial crisis was inevitable unless major changes were implemented quickly. This information motivated me to accelerate my investment timeline even further. If my family was heading toward financial disaster, I wanted to be in a position to help if necessary, but I also wanted to be insulated from any potential impacts on my own financial security. Building a larger and more diversified property portfolio seemed like the best strategy for achieving both objectives. The opportunity to expand into the Texas market came through Marcus Thompson's network of investor contacts. A wholesaler in Dallas had identified a package of 3 single-family homes that were being sold together by an estate that needed to liquidate assets quickly. The properties were located in different neighborhoods that were showing strong indicators for future appreciation, and the combined purchase price represented significant savings compared to buying similar properties individually. The scale of this investment would require me to leverage my existing properties to secure financing, creating a level of financial risk that was higher than my previous purchases. But the potential returns were proportionally greater, with 3 rental properties that could significantly increase my monthly income while diversifying my geographic exposure beyond Arizona. The decision to pursue this Texas investment represented a major escalation in my real estate career, and a commitment to building wealth at a pace that would make family criticism irrelevant within a relatively short time frame. If Linda wanted to dismiss my achievements and David wanted to condescend to my investment strategies, I would simply build a property portfolio so substantial that their opinions would become meaningless. The Texas investment opportunity proved to be even more profitable than I had projected, generating substantial monthly cash flow while providing the geographic diversification that Marcus had recommended. Within 18 months of purchasing the 3 Dallas properties, I had renovated all of them to high standards and secured long-term leases with reliable tenants. The combined rental income from my 9 properties across Arizona and Texas was now exceeding $15,000 per month, creating a level of financial security that most people never achieve at any age. But the emotional distance between my family and me continued to widen as my wealth grew. Every conversation with Linda seemed to include new criticisms of my lifestyle choices or suggestions that I should be focusing on finding a husband rather than expanding my property portfolio. She had begun making comments to extended family members and social acquaintances about my obsession with real estate, portraying my financial success as evidence of misplaced priorities rather than impressive business achievements. The breaking point came during what should have been a celebration of my 27th birthday. Linda had insisted on organizing a family dinner at an upscale restaurant in Riverside, ostensibly to mark the occasion, but primarily to showcase our family's continued prosperity to the social circle she was determined to impress. The guest list included several of Linda's closest friends along with their adult children, creating an audience for what would become the most devastating confrontation of our relationship. The evening began with Linda making elaborate toasts about family success and the importance of maintaining traditional values while adapting to changing circumstances. She spoke about David's continued advancement in his financial services career and his recent engagement to Ashley, presenting their relationship as a model of appropriate life choices and social responsibility. When the conversation turned to my own achievements, Linda's tone became noticeably more restrained and qualified. Rather than celebrating my real estate success directly, Linda made vague comments about my business interests and suggested that I was exploring various investment opportunities while continuing to search for the right life partner. Her description made it sound like my property portfolio was a temporary hobby rather than a substantial business enterprise that was generating significant wealth. The subtle dismissal was particularly painful because it was delivered in front of people whose opinions Linda valued more than her own daughter's feelings. The moment that changed everything came when Mrs. Patterson, one of Linda's oldest friends, asked directly about my real estate investments and whether I was planning to settle down in California or continue pursuing opportunities in other markets. It was an innocent question that provided an opening for me to share details about my actual achievements and future plans. I explained that I owned 9 rental properties across Arizona and Texas that were generating substantial monthly income, and that I was considering expanding into California markets that offered strong appreciation potential. I mentioned that my portfolio was now valued at approximately $1.8 million, and that the passive income was sufficient to support any lifestyle I chose to pursue, giving me complete freedom to make decisions based on personal preferences rather than financial necessity. The reaction around the table was immediate and telling. Mrs. Patterson and the other guests responded with genuine interest and impressed congratulations, asking thoughtful questions about my investment strategies and market analysis. But Linda's expression revealed a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and anger that was impossible to miss. She had clearly not expected me to discuss the actual scope of my financial success, and my detailed description of my wealth had undermined the narrative she had been constructing about my life circumstances. David attempted to minimize the impact of my revelations by making comments about the risks associated with real estate investing and suggesting that my portfolio might be vulnerable to market downturns or economic instability. His tone was condescending in a way that implied I was naive about financial management, despite the obvious evidence that my investment strategies were generating superior returns compared to his traditional approach to wealth building. But the most painful reaction came from Linda herself, who responded to the guests' positive comments about my achievements by making dismissive remarks about the appropriateness of my career choices for someone from our family background. She suggested that real estate investing was fine for now, but wondered aloud whether I had considered the long-term implications of tying up so much capital in illiquid assets, rather than focusing on finding a successful husband who could provide more traditional forms of financial security. The implication that my $1.8 million property portfolio was somehow inadequate or inappropriate compared to depending on a husband for financial support was so absurd and offensive that I found myself unable to respond diplomatically. The conversation had revealed the fundamental disconnect between Linda's values and my own priorities in a way that made continued pretense impossible. I excused myself from the table and walked outside to process what had just happened. Standing in the restaurant parking lot, I realized that no amount of financial success would ever be sufficient to earn Linda's genuine approval or respect. Her criticism wasn't based on legitimate concerns about my career choices. It was rooted in her own insecurities and her need to maintain control over family narratives that supported her worldview. When I returned to the table, I made a decision that would alter our family dynamics permanently. Rather than continuing to seek validation that would never come, I announced that I had decided to return to California and establish permanent residence in Riverside. I explained that my real estate success had given me the financial freedom to live anywhere I chose, and that I wanted to be closer to family during this phase of my life. The announcement was received with what appeared to be enthusiasm from everyone at the table, but I could see the concern in Linda's eyes. She understood intuitively that my return to Riverside with substantial wealth would create complications for the carefully constructed image she had been maintaining about our family's financial circumstances. My presence as a genuinely successful family member would highlight the artificial nature of the prosperity she had been performing for years. Over the following weeks, I began searching for a property in Riverside that would serve as both my primary residence and a statement about the level of success I had achieved through real estate investing. I wanted something substantial enough to be undeniably impressive, but not so ostentatious that it would appear to be an intentional provocation. The goal was to establish myself as a permanent presence in the community, while demonstrating the tangible results of the career path that Linda had consistently dismissed. The search process revealed the dramatic changes that had occurred in Riverside's real estate market during my years in Arizona and Texas. Property values in the most desirable neighborhoods had increased significantly, and the inventory of available homes in the price range I was considering was extremely limited. But my experience in other markets had taught me to be patient and thorough in analyzing potential purchases, especially for a property that would serve as my primary residence. The house I eventually found exceeded every expectation I had developed during months of searching. Located in Riverside's most exclusive neighborhood, the property was a modern Mediterranean-style home with 4 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, and panoramic views of the city and surrounding mountains. The house featured high-end finishes throughout, including marble floors, custom cabinetry, and professional-grade appliances that would appeal to the most discriminating buyers. More importantly, the property was being sold by the original owners who had built it as their dream home but were relocating to another state for business reasons. They were motivated to sell quickly and had priced the house aggressively to attract serious buyers who could close rapidly. The asking price was $850,000, which represented excellent value for a property of this caliber in such a prestigious location. The decision to purchase this particular house was strategic as well as emotional. The neighborhood was home to Riverside's most successful business leaders, professionals, and established families, including several people who were part of Linda's social circle. Owning property in this area would establish my credibility within the community, while making it impossible for anyone to dismiss my financial achievements as insignificant or temporary. The financing process was surprisingly straightforward given my established relationship with lenders and the strength of my property portfolio. I was able to structure the purchase as a cash transaction by leveraging equity from my existing properties, which eliminated the complications and delays associated with traditional mortgage financing. The ability to close within 30 days gave me a significant advantage over other potential buyers who would need more time to arrange financing. The day I received the keys to my new home was one of the most satisfying moments of my entire real estate career. Walking through the empty rooms and imagining how I would furnish and personalize the space, I felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the financial achievement. This house represented proof that the unconventional path I had chosen was not only viable, but capable of delivering results that exceeded traditional measures of success. But the most significant aspect of this purchase was its location within the same exclusive neighborhood where Linda had always dreamed of living. For years, she had made comments about the beautiful homes in this area and the successful families who lived there, always with the implication that our family belonged in such elevated circumstances. Now I would be living among the people she most wanted to impress, having earned my place through legitimate business success rather than the debt-financed performance of wealth that characterized her own approach. The process of moving into the house and establishing my permanent residence in Riverside took several weeks of coordination with furniture deliveries, utility connections, and the dozens of details required to transform an empty property into a comfortable home. During this period, I maintained minimal contact with my immediate family, preferring to complete the transition before announcing my presence in the neighborhood. Linda learned about my house purchase through the local real estate network, rather than from me directly. The sale of such a prominent property in Riverside's most exclusive neighborhood was reported in the local newspaper's real estate section, and Linda's friends began calling to ask whether the Rebecca Martinez listed as the buyer was related to their family. The calls forced Linda to confront the reality of my financial success in a way that could not be minimized or dismissed. Her initial reaction was to question whether I had actually purchased the property myself, or whether I had received financial assistance from undisclosed sources. The idea that her 27-year-old daughter could afford to buy an $850,000 house with cash was so far outside Linda's understanding of appropriate wealth accumulation timelines that she initially refused to accept it as genuine. But the property records were public information that confirmed both the purchase price and my sole ownership of the house. There was no mortgage listed, indicating that the transaction had been completed with cash, and there were no co-owners or co-signers who might have provided financial assistance. The documentation made it impossible to deny that I had independently accumulated sufficient wealth to make this purchase without any external support. David's reaction was more complex, reflecting his understanding of real estate values and his recognition that my property portfolio had clearly generated substantial equity gains beyond what he had previously understood. His initial assumption had been that my real estate investing was modestly profitable but not capable of generating serious wealth within such a short time frame. The evidence of my house purchase forced him to recalculate his assessment of my financial success. The conversation where Linda finally confronted me about the house purchase revealed the depth of her confusion and resentment about my achievements. She called me 3 days after the sale was reported in the newspaper, ostensibly to congratulate me but actually to demand explanations about how I had been able to afford such an expensive property. Her tone was accusatory in a way that implied I had somehow deceived the family about my financial circumstances. I explained patiently that my real estate portfolio had appreciated significantly over the past 2 years, and that the rental income from 9 properties was generating sufficient cash flow to support the mortgage payments, even if I had chosen to finance the purchase. But I had decided to buy the house with cash because it simplified the transaction and eliminated the ongoing obligation of mortgage payments. Linda's response revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of how wealth creation actually works. She seemed genuinely confused about how real estate investments could generate enough equity and income to support such a major purchase, despite my previous explanations about property appreciation and rental cash flow. Her worldview was so shaped by debt-financed consumption that the concept of building genuine wealth through asset accumulation was foreign to her. More problematically, Linda began expressing concerns about how my house purchase would affect our family's social standing within the community. She worried that people would wonder how I had been able to afford such an expensive property, and that speculation about my financial resources might lead to uncomfortable questions about our family's overall wealth and business success. The underlying issue was that my obvious prosperity threatened the carefully constructed narrative Linda had maintained about our family's financial circumstances. If I could afford to buy an $850,000 house with cash, it raised questions about why my parents continued to rent their own home and maintain lifestyle patterns that suggested more modest financial resources. Linda's anxiety about these potential social complications revealed the artificial nature of the wealth she had been performing for years. She was worried that my genuine financial success would expose the fact that our family's apparent prosperity was largely based on debt and creative financing rather than actual asset accumulation. The confrontation that would destroy our relationship permanently occurred on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after I had moved into my new house. Linda had been driving through the neighborhood, ostensibly to visit a friend who lived nearby, but actually to see my property and assess its impact on her own social standing within the community. She arrived at my front door unannounced, expecting to be welcomed inside for a tour and conversation about my decorating plans and settling in process. But her demeanor was hostile rather than celebratory, and her first comments were criticisms of the house's location and style, rather than congratulations on my achievement. Linda's objections to my house purchase were both personal and strategic. On a personal level, she resented that I had achieved the kind of lifestyle success that she had always wanted for herself, but had never been able to attain through her own efforts. On a strategic level, she was concerned that my obvious wealth would undermine her ability to maintain the social image she had carefully constructed over many years. Her specific complaints revealed the depth of her narcissistic perspective on family relationships and social dynamics. She suggested that my decision to buy such an expensive house in Riverside's most exclusive neighborhood was inappropriate because it would make other family members look unsuccessful by comparison. She argued that I should have consulted with her before making such a major purchase because it would affect how people perceived our entire family. The conversation escalated quickly when Linda began demanding that I explain exactly how I had accumulated enough wealth to afford the house purchase. Her tone was accusatory and suspicious, as if she believed I had somehow deceived her about my financial resources or obtained money through questionable means. She seemed incapable of accepting that my real estate investing had been as successful as I had described. When I provided detailed explanations about my property portfolio, rental income, and equity gains, Linda's response was to minimize my achievements and suggest that real estate investing was inherently risky and unsustainable. She predicted that market downturns would eventually eliminate my wealth and leave me in worse financial condition than if I had pursued more traditional approaches to building security. But the conversation reached its breaking point when Linda began making demands about how I should use my wealth to support other family members and maintain appropriate social appearances. She suggested that I should provide financial assistance to help David and Ashley purchase their own home rather than continuing to rent expensive apartments. She also implied that I should contribute to family social expenses and charitable commitments that would enhance our collective reputation within the community. The assumption that my financial success created obligations to subsidize other family members' lifestyle choices was so offensive and presumptuous that I found myself unable to continue the conversation diplomatically. Linda's demands revealed that she viewed my wealth as a family resource that should be managed according to her priorities rather than my own judgment. My response was direct and uncompromising. I explained that I had built my real estate portfolio through disciplined investing and personal sacrifice, and that I had no intention of using my wealth to enable other people's poor financial decisions or support lifestyle choices that I considered irresponsible. I pointed out that Linda's own spending patterns had created financial stress for my father, and that her demands for family financial support were particularly inappropriate given her track record of money management. Linda's reaction was immediate and explosive. She began screaming about my ingratitude and selfishness, accusing me of forgetting my family obligations and prioritizing money over relationships. She declared that my financial success had changed me in ways that made me arrogant and uncaring about the people who had supported me throughout my life. The accusations were so unfair and disconnected from reality that I felt something fundamental shift in my emotional relationship with Linda. The woman screaming at me in my own living room was not a loving mother expressing legitimate concerns about family dynamics. She was a narcissistic individual whose primary concern was maintaining control over family resources and social narratives that supported her own self-image. When I calmly explained that I would not be providing financial support for family members who had consistently dismissed my achievements and criticized my life choices, Linda's rage reached a level that was genuinely frightening. She began making threats about cutting off all family communication and ensuring that I would be excluded from future family events and social gatherings. The final explosion came when Linda declared that if I was going to be selfish with my money and refuse to help family members who needed support, then I was no longer welcome in her family. She screamed that I was dead to her and that she would tell everyone in our social circle that I had chosen money over family loyalty. Standing in the foyer of my beautiful new home, listening to my mother disown me because I refused to subsidize her financial irresponsibility, I felt a clarity that was almost liberating. The relationship I had been trying to preserve was based on conditional love that would only continue as long as I submitted to Linda's control and supported her lifestyle choices, regardless of their impact on my own financial security. My response was measured and final. I told Linda that she was welcome to leave my house immediately, and that she should not expect to be invited back until she was prepared to treat me with the respect that any successful adult deserved from their family members. I explained that my financial success was the result of years of hard work and smart decisions, and that I would not apologize for achieving goals that she had consistently told me were impossible. Linda's exit from my house was dramatic and definitive. She screamed additional threats and accusations as she walked to her car, including a promise that she would make sure everyone in Riverside understood what kind of person I really was. The threats were empty and pathetic, revealing the limited power she actually possessed outside of her ability to create emotional drama within our family. Watching her drive away, I realized that this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment I started building genuine wealth through real estate investing. Linda's worldview could not accommodate the reality of my financial independence, and her need to maintain control over family narratives was incompatible with my refusal to seek her approval or support her lifestyle choices. The aftermath of Linda's disownment was both liberating and challenging in ways I had not anticipated. On one hand, I was free from the constant criticism and emotional manipulation that had characterized our relationship for years. On the other hand, I had to rebuild my understanding of family relationships and social connections, without the toxic dynamics that had shaped my perspective since childhood. The most immediate consequence was the impact on my relationships with other family members. Bob called me within hours of Linda's return home, attempting to mediate the conflict and encourage reconciliation. But his conversation revealed that he was more concerned about maintaining peace in his marriage than addressing the legitimate issues that had caused the confrontation. David's reaction was predictably supportive of Linda's position, though his criticism of my behavior was delivered with less emotional intensity than her explosive accusations. He suggested that I should have been more diplomatic in handling Linda's concerns, and that my refusal to provide family financial support demonstrated a lack of appropriate values and priorities. The response that mattered most came from Aunt Carmen, who called me 2 days after the confrontation to express her support for the boundaries I had established. Carmen had observed Linda's financial irresponsibility for years and had watched the deteriorating impact on Bob's business and emotional well-being. She understood that my refusal to enable Linda's spending patterns was both financially wise and emotionally necessary. Carmen's validation provided crucial perspective during the weeks following my disownment. She helped me understand that Linda's extreme reaction was evidence of her own financial desperation, rather than legitimate concerns about family loyalty. Carmen suspected that my parents' financial situation was more precarious than they had admitted, and that Linda's demands for financial support were motivated by genuine need rather than simple greed. This insight proved to be accurate within a remarkably short time frame. 3 months after Linda declared me dead to the family, Bob's construction company lost its largest contract to a competitor who had underbid the project by a margin that made profitable completion impossible. The loss of this major revenue source created immediate cash flow problems that exposed the unsustainable nature of their debt-financed lifestyle. Linda's credit card debt had reached levels that required increasingly creative financial management to maintain minimum payments. The combination of reduced business income and unchanging personal expenses created a crisis that could not be resolved through the balance transfers and cash advances that had provided temporary solutions in the past. The cascade of financial failures that followed was both predictable and devastating. Within 6 months of my disownment, Bob was forced to sell his construction equipment to pay business debts, effectively ending the company that had supported our family for 2 generations. Linda's credit cards were maxed out and several accounts were in default, destroying the credit rating that had enabled their debt-financed lifestyle. The most symbolic consequence was their forced move from the rented house in Riverside's prestigious neighborhood, where Linda had performed wealth for so many years. The landlord refused to renew their lease after learning about their deteriorating financial circumstances, and they were unable to find comparable housing that they could afford with their reduced income. Linda's new reality was a small apartment in a less desirable part of the city, furnished with budget furniture that replaced the leased pieces she could no longer afford. The BMW was returned to the dealership when she could no longer make payments, replaced by a used Honda that highlighted the dramatic change in her circumstances. The social consequences were equally devastating for someone who had built her identity around maintaining appearances and social status. Linda's friends gradually distanced themselves as her financial problems became apparent, and she was forced to withdraw from the country club and social organizations that had provided validation and purpose for years. Meanwhile, my own life in Riverside flourished in ways that validated every decision I had made about real estate investing and family boundaries. My house became a center for entertaining friends and business associates, hosting dinner parties and gatherings that established my position within the community's business and social networks. The contrast between my continued success and my family's financial collapse was stark and undeniable. While Linda struggled to pay rent on her small apartment, I was expanding my real estate portfolio with additional property purchases in California's appreciating markets. While Bob looked for employment after losing his business, I was generating substantial passive income from rental properties that required minimal active management. The vindication was complete but bittersweet. I had proven that my unconventional approach to wealth building was not only viable, but superior to the debt-financed lifestyle that Linda had insisted was more appropriate for our family. But the cost of this validation was the permanent destruction of relationships with people I had hoped would eventually recognize and celebrate my achievements. The most painful aspect was Bob's gradual understanding that my financial advice and investment strategies could have prevented their crisis if he had been willing to challenge Linda's spending patterns and implement disciplined financial management. His occasional phone calls revealed regret about the opportunities that had been missed and the damage that could have been avoided. But the most satisfying consequence was the recognition I received from Riverside's business community for my real estate expertise and investment success. I was invited to speak at local business organizations about property investing and market analysis, establishing a reputation that led to consulting opportunities and partnership proposals from other successful investors. My story became an inspiration for other young professionals who were interested in building wealth through real estate, and I began mentoring investors who were pursuing similar strategies in other markets. The knowledge and experience I had gained through years of disciplined investing became valuable resources that I could share with people who appreciated the principles that had guided my success. 3 years after Linda declared me dead to the family, I received a letter that revealed the full extent of their financial devastation. Bob had filed for bankruptcy after exhausting all other options for managing their accumulated debts, and Linda was working part-time at a retail job to supplement the minimal income from his new employment with a larger construction firm. The letter was an attempt at reconciliation that acknowledged the financial wisdom I had demonstrated and expressed regret about the criticism and rejection I had faced during my wealth-building years. Bob admitted that Linda's spending patterns had been unsustainable and that my refusal to enable their poor financial decisions had been appropriate and necessary. But the letter also included requests for financial assistance that revealed how little they understood about the boundaries I had established and the reasons for maintaining them. Bob suggested that I might consider providing a loan to help them purchase a modest home, with repayment terms that would be manageable given their reduced circumstances. My response was compassionate but firm. I acknowledged their financial difficulties and expressed genuine concern about their well-being, but I explained that providing financial assistance would not address the underlying problems that had created their crisis. Until they demonstrated genuine commitment to financial responsibility and sustainable lifestyle choices, any money I provided would simply enable continued poor decision-making. The wisdom of this position was validated when I learned through Aunt Carmen that Linda had been pressuring Bob to contact me for financial help, while simultaneously telling neighbors and former friends that I was a selfish daughter who had abandoned her family in their time of need. Her inability to take responsibility for the consequences of her own choices made reconciliation impossible regardless of their financial circumstances. Today, as I watch the sunrise from the balcony of my Riverside home, I understand that the journey from Linda's disownment to her financial collapse was not about revenge or vindication. It was about the inevitable consequences of choosing sustainable wealth-building strategies over debt finance consumption and authentic relationships over toxic family dynamics. My real estate portfolio now includes 14 properties across 4 states, generating monthly income that exceeds most people's annual salaries. But the true measure of my success is not the financial wealth I have accumulated. It is the freedom to make decisions based on my own values and priorities, rather than the approval of people who never understood or appreciated the path I chose to pursue. The contrast between my continued prosperity and my family's financial destruction serves as a powerful reminder that wealth creation requires discipline, patience, and the courage to maintain boundaries with people who would undermine your progress for their own benefit. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the least capable of supporting your genuine success. Linda's declaration that I was dead to her became the catalyst for building a life that was more successful and fulfilling than anything I could have achieved while seeking her approval. The pain of family rejection was temporary, but the wealth and independence I built during that period will last for generations. 5 years have passed since that explosive confrontation in my living room, and the trajectory of my life compared to my family's circumstances has created a stark illustration of how financial principles and personal boundaries ultimately determine long-term outcomes. While I've continued building wealth through strategic real estate investments and expanding into new markets, my family's financial situation has deteriorated to levels that would have seemed impossible during their years of performing prosperity. My property portfolio has grown to encompass 22 rental units across 6 states, generating monthly passive income that exceeds what most professionals earn in an entire year. The geographic diversification has provided stability during market fluctuations, while the appreciation in property values has created equity gains that have multiplied my net worth far beyond what I initially projected when I started investing in college. The success has enabled me to establish Martinez Properties as a formal real estate investment company, with a small but efficient team managing acquisitions, renovations, and property management across multiple markets. What began as a personal wealth-building strategy has evolved into a sustainable business that creates value for investors while providing quality housing for tenants who appreciate well-maintained properties in desirable locations. The business growth has also opened opportunities for partnerships with other successful investors and developers who recognize the systematic approach I've developed for identifying undervalued properties and executing profitable renovations. These collaborations have accelerated my learning curve while providing access to larger and more complex investment opportunities that would have been difficult to pursue independently. But the most significant development has been my relationship with Michael Rodriguez, a fellow real estate investor whom I met at a property investment conference in San Diego. Michael had built his own portfolio through a similar combination of disciplined saving, market analysis, and hands-on property management, creating a foundation for genuine understanding and mutual respect that had been missing from my previous romantic relationships. Our courtship was refreshingly free from the complications that my wealth had created in earlier dating experiences. Michael understood real estate investing from personal experience and could appreciate the achievement my portfolio represented without feeling intimidated or resentful. His own financial independence meant that our relationship developed based on compatibility and shared values, rather than economic considerations or lifestyle expectations. The wedding we planned was a reflection of our shared priorities. Elegant, but not ostentatious, focused on celebrating our commitment with people who genuinely supported our relationship rather than performing social status for a larger audience. The guest list included Aunt Carmen, my real estate investing mentors, close friends from various chapters of my life, and Michael's family, who had welcomed me warmly from our first meeting. Notably absent from the celebration were my immediate family members, whose continued financial struggles and unwillingness to acknowledge their role in our estrangement made their attendance both impossible and inappropriate. The absence was painful in some ways, but it also highlighted how much healthier my life had become without the constant criticism and emotional manipulation that had characterized those relationships for years. The honeymoon was a month-long tour of European cities, where we studied different approaches to urban development and historic property renovation. The trip combined pleasure with professional development, visiting properties and meeting investors who were pursuing similar strategies in international markets. The experience provided inspiration for potential future expansion, while reinforcing our shared passion for real estate as both a business and a lifestyle. Returning to Riverside as a married couple marked another milestone in the life I had built, independently of my family's approval or support. Our combined real estate portfolios created opportunities for larger investment projects, while our shared expertise enabled more sophisticated analysis of market trends and development opportunities. The house that had triggered Linda's explosive reaction to my success became the foundation for a home filled with genuine warmth and authentic relationships. Michael's presence transformed the space from a symbol of individual achievement into a center for entertaining friends, hosting business meetings, and planning future investments that would benefit from our combined resources and expertise. The contrast with my family's continued struggles was impossible to ignore, though I no longer derived satisfaction from their misfortunes in the way that might have been expected given the pain they had caused during my wealth-building years. Time and distance had provided perspective that allowed me to view their situation with sadness rather than vindication, understanding that their financial collapse was the inevitable result of choices they had made consistently over many years. Bob's bankruptcy had forced him to start over professionally at an age when most people are planning for retirement. His new position with a larger construction firm provided steady income, but without the independence and potential for wealth building that business ownership had offered. The years of financial stress had taken a visible toll on his health and confidence, aging him in ways that seemed disproportionate to the actual time that had passed. Linda's adjustment to their reduced circumstances had been particularly difficult given her lifelong focus on social status and material possessions. The retail job she had taken to supplement their household income was a constant reminder of how far she had fallen from the lifestyle she had considered her birthright. Former friends from their prosperous years had largely disappeared, leaving her isolated and bitter about the social consequences of their financial failures. David's situation was more complex, as his career in financial services had continued to advance despite the challenges his parents were facing. But his unwillingness to acknowledge the wisdom of the investment strategies I had pursued, combined with his continued support for Linda's perspective on family obligations, had prevented any meaningful reconciliation between us. His marriage to Ashley had produced 2 children who would grow up without knowing their aunt, or understanding the family dynamics that had created such permanent divisions. The loss of those relationships was particularly poignant, as I had hoped to be a positive influence in their lives, while sharing the financial education that could help them avoid repeating their grandparents' mistakes. Aunt Carmen remained the bridge between my new life and the family relationships that had shaped my earlier years. Her restaurant had continued to thrive through consistent application of the conservative financial management principles that had guided her success for decades. She had watched my family's financial collapse with sadness but without surprise, having observed the unsustainable patterns that made such an outcome inevitable. Carmen's perspective on the family situation was both compassionate and realistic. She maintained relationships with Bob and Linda while avoiding any financial entanglement that might enable their continued poor decision-making. Her approach provided a model for how I might eventually handle future contact with family members who had rejected my success but would likely seek reconciliation if their circumstances became desperate enough. The most unexpected development came through a letter I received from David on the 5th anniversary of Linda's disownment. The communication was prompted by a medical crisis that had hospitalized Bob with stress-related health problems that required expensive treatment their insurance didn't fully cover. The letter was an attempt to request financial assistance, but it also included acknowledgments of my financial success and expressions of regret about the family conflicts that had created such lasting divisions. David's tone was more humble than any previous communication, reflecting his growing understanding that my real estate expertise and investment success represented genuine achievement, rather than luck or temporary market conditions. He had begun to recognize that the principles I had applied to wealth building were producing sustainable results, while his own traditional investment approaches had generated more modest returns over the same time frame. The letter also revealed information about Linda's evolving perspective on our estrangement and her growing recognition that her demands for financial support had been inappropriate and counterproductive. David suggested that she was prepared to apologize for her behavior and to acknowledge the legitimacy of my career choices, though he was careful not to make specific promises about what such a reconciliation might involve. My response to David's letter was carefully considered and reflected the emotional growth I had experienced during years of building a life free from toxic family dynamics. I expressed genuine concern about Bob's health problems and offered to cover his medical expenses directly, ensuring that the financial assistance would address his immediate needs without providing opportunities for misuse by other family members. But I also made clear that financial assistance would not constitute acceptance of renewed family relationships unless there were genuine changes in behavior and attitudes that demonstrated respect for the boundaries I had established. The medical crisis had created an opportunity for compassion, but it had not eliminated the underlying issues that had made our estrangement necessary in the first place. The arrangement I proposed was both generous and protective of my own interests. I would establish a medical fund that would cover Bob's treatment costs and ongoing health expenses, with payments made directly to healthcare providers, rather than to family members who might divert the money for other purposes. The fund would be administered by a third party to ensure transparency and prevent the financial assistance from becoming a source of additional family conflict. The response to this offer revealed the extent to which my family's perspectives had evolved during their years of financial struggle. Bob was genuinely grateful for the assistance and expressed understanding about the conditions I had attached to the support. His communication was apologetic in tone and acknowledged that my refusal to enable their previous financial irresponsibility had been appropriate and necessary. Linda's reaction was more complex, reflecting her ongoing struggle to accept responsibility for the choices that had created their crisis. She was grateful for the medical assistance but still seemed to expect that providing this support would lead to full reconciliation and restoration of normal family relationships. Her inability to understand that trust would need to be rebuilt gradually through consistent behavior change revealed that her fundamental attitudes about money and family obligations had not evolved significantly. David's response was the most encouraging, as it included genuine acknowledgement of my financial expertise and expressions of interest in learning from my investment strategies. He had begun to recognize that his traditional approach to wealth building through employer retirement plans and stock market investments was producing inferior results compared to my real estate focus. The conversation that followed David's letter led to a series of meetings where I shared detailed information about my investment strategies, market analysis techniques, and property management systems. These discussions marked the first time since college that a family member had shown genuine interest in understanding my business approach, rather than dismissing it as inappropriate or unsustainable. David's willingness to learn was motivated partly by his growing recognition that his current financial trajectory would not provide the security he wanted for his family's future. His corporate job provided steady income but limited opportunities for wealth accumulation, and he was beginning to understand that building genuine financial independence would require more aggressive investment strategies. The mentoring relationship that developed between David and me was beneficial for both parties, providing him with real estate education while giving me an opportunity to share knowledge with someone who could appreciate the complexity of what I had achieved. His background in financial services enabled him to understand the mathematical principles underlying my investment calculations, while my practical experience provided insights that were not available through traditional financial education. Within 2 years of our initial reconciliation, David had purchased his first rental property, using strategies I had recommended for identifying undervalued assets in emerging markets. The success of this initial investment led to additional purchases that began generating the passive income streams that could eventually replace his dependence on corporate employment. The transformation in David's perspective on wealth building and family relationships was remarkable to witness. As he experienced the satisfaction of building genuine assets through disciplined investment strategies, he began to understand why I had been unwilling to compromise my financial principles to accommodate family pressure and social expectations. His success with real estate investing also provided a framework for rebuilding our sibling relationship based on mutual respect and shared interests, rather than the competitive dynamics that had characterized our childhood interactions. We began meeting regularly to discuss market trends, evaluate potential investment opportunities, and share strategies for managing the challenges of scaling real estate portfolios. The most significant development came when David approached me about partnering on a larger investment project that would require our combined resources and expertise. He had identified a small apartment complex that was being sold by an estate and represented an opportunity for substantial renovation and repositioning within an improving neighborhood. The partnership proposal was both a business opportunity and a symbol of how dramatically our relationship had evolved. Working together on this project would require trust, communication, and shared decision-making in ways that would have been impossible during our earlier conflicts about family obligations and appropriate career choices. The apartment complex renovation became a model for future collaborations, generating strong returns while demonstrating that our different skill sets were complementary rather than competitive. David's financial services background provided expertise in securing favorable financing terms, while my construction and property management experience ensured efficient renovation execution and successful tenant placement. The success of our partnership led to additional joint investments that accelerated wealth building for both of us, while creating a family business relationship that was based on mutual benefit rather than obligation or emotional manipulation. The contrast with our previous family dynamics was striking and satisfying, proving that healthy relationships were possible when they were built on respect and shared values. Bob's health recovery was aided significantly by the medical fund, which had eliminated the financial stress that had contributed to his cardiovascular problems. The improved health enabled him to continue working while planning for a retirement that would be more secure than had seemed possible during the worst period of their financial crisis. More importantly, Bob's experience with serious health problems had provided perspective on the relative importance of family relationships compared to the financial conflicts that had divided us for years. He began reaching out regularly with phone calls and messages that focused on rebuilding emotional connections, rather than requesting additional financial assistance. Linda's evolution was slower and more difficult, reflecting personality traits and behavioral patterns that had been reinforced over decades of marriage and social interaction. She struggled to accept responsibility for the financial decisions that had created their crisis, and she continued to expect that my financial success created obligations to support family members regardless of their past behavior or current choices. But the extended period of financial hardship had gradually worn down her resistance to acknowledging that alternative approaches to money management might be more effective than the strategies she had pursued. The contrast between my continued prosperity and their ongoing struggles was too obvious to deny, and she began asking questions about real estate investing that suggested genuine interest in learning, rather than simple criticism. The breakthrough in my relationship with Linda came during a conversation where she asked for advice about a small inheritance she had received from a distant relative. Rather than spending the money on immediate consumption or using it to pay down debt, she wanted to understand whether real estate investing might provide better long-term returns. Her willingness to seek my guidance on financial matters represented a fundamental shift in our relationship dynamic, acknowledging my expertise while creating opportunities for positive interaction that had been missing for years. The conversation was the first time since college that Linda had treated me as an adult, whose knowledge and experience deserved respect rather than dismissal. The investment advice I provided was conservative and appropriate for someone with limited experience and modest capital. I recommended starting with a small residential property that would require minimal renovation while providing education about the fundamentals of rental property ownership and management. Linda's first real estate investment was a small condominium that generated modest rental income while serving as a learning laboratory for understanding property maintenance, tenant relations, and local market conditions. The success of this initial purchase led to additional investments that began providing financial stability that had been missing from her life for years. More significantly, the real estate investing provided Linda with productive activities and intellectual challenges that improved her emotional well-being while reducing her dependence on social status and material possessions for self-esteem. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable, as she developed confidence in her ability to make smart financial decisions independently. The healing process with my family required years of patient boundary setting and consistent demonstration that healthy relationships were possible when they were based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence or emotional manipulation. The progress was sometimes frustratingly slow, but the results validated the principles I had maintained throughout the years of conflict and estrangement. Today, as Michael and I plan for expanding our real estate business into new markets while considering starting a family of our own, I understand that the painful years of family rejection were necessary for developing the independence and confidence that enabled genuine success. The wealth I built during that period provided not just financial security, but the psychological foundation for creating authentic relationships that support growth, rather than limiting potential. The lessons learned from my family's financial collapse and gradual recovery have informed my approach to mentoring other young investors who face similar conflicts between family expectations and personal financial goals. The importance of maintaining boundaries with people who would undermine your progress cannot be overstated, even when those people are family members who claim to have your best interests at heart. The story of my journey from family rejection to financial independence demonstrates that sustainable wealth creation requires more than investment knowledge and market timing. It requires the emotional strength to pursue long-term goals despite short-term criticism, the wisdom to distinguish between genuine support and toxic enabling, and the courage to build a life that reflects your own values rather than other people's expectations. My mother's declaration that I was dead to her became the catalyst for building a life that was more successful and fulfilling than anything I could have achieved, while seeking approval from people who were incapable of recognizing or celebrating authentic achievement. The pain of that rejection was temporary, but the independence and prosperity it forced me to develop will benefit not just my own life, but the lives of future generations who will inherit the wealth and wisdom that came from choosing principles over popularity. The contrast between my family's debt-financed performance of wealth and my asset-based accumulation of genuine prosperity serves as a powerful reminder that financial success requires substance rather than appearance, discipline rather than credit, and patience rather than immediate gratification. These principles are not complicated, but they require the strength to maintain them, despite pressure from people who find them threatening or inconvenient. The real estate portfolio that began with a single college condominium has become the foundation for generational wealth that will provide opportunities for my future children while supporting charitable causes that help other young people develop financial literacy and investment skills. The business that started as personal wealth building has evolved into a platform for creating positive impact that extends far beyond my own financial interests. Looking back on the years of family conflict and eventual reconciliation, I recognize that every painful confrontation and difficult boundary-setting conversation was necessary for creating the life I now enjoy. The people who tried to limit my potential were acting from their own fears and limitations rather than genuine concern for my welfare, and the progress I made despite their opposition validated every difficult decision about prioritizing my own judgment over their approval. The sunrise I watch from my home's balcony each morning serves as a daily reminder that the most beautiful views are often visible only to those who have climbed the highest mountains, endured the most challenging weather, and refused to turn back when the path became difficult. The wealth and independence I've achieved required similar perseverance, but the rewards have exceeded every sacrifice that was necessary to reach this destination. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.